A robot has invaded the town. He jumped on the pool and someone rocket launched him in the pool. He broke down, so then he started flying in the air. And then he turned the time to nighttime. But he couldn't turn it off. And then after that, he turned it back to day. But it was too late. He was already in the sky, and he was falling down. He wasn't broken. And then he fell to the ground really hard, and then he pulled out his Glock 19 and then started shooting the buildings and people. So then he got on a carousel and then got thrown into a river and then started floating in the air again. And then went into a magma cube. It almost made him die. He landed in water again, but he went back on the magma cube and then he died. But that didn't stop him. He became a clown. But he could fix it. And then he turned himself. He was a small robot now. But people didn't know he could size up really fast. And then he sized up as big as he could and then tried to go into a washing machine, but he failed. And then he went on a trampoline, but he barely bounced. And then went into the blender. And why am I... Bro, this kid's picking me up, that's why. He goes into a blender, and they make a robot smoothie. He gets thrown out like fairy dust. And then he ends up falling out. He gets pushed into a radio tower. He gets pushed into a tree and his whole body almost went into the water. His legs turned off. And they broke, so he had to ragdoll his way there. And he got thrown into the air again. His legs instantly healed. And then he started falling from the sky again. And then I'm making a video of Caleb. And then he starts ragdolling all over the place. Does a full-on backflip and then lands on the ground. He gets pushed in the pool and he gets traumatized. He floats up in the air and then he goes up on top of a building. He's gonna jump. His hands got stuck in the wall. He tried to get him out, but he couldn't. And then he fell to the bottom. And then he died again somehow because he suffocated to death. He came back, he became a clone again. But again, he could just turn back giant. And then he got on a carousel trying to look, and then he got thrown off. And then he started floating in the air and thrown into the river again. He starts floating away in the river. And then he starts flowing back and forth in the river. He gets sick. He smashes into a bridge and goes back in the river. And then this time it was really over, right? No. He started floating in the air. But this time he was really gone, right? But no. They're that annoying where they let him come back and his head smashed into the floor. He had a concussion. He wanted to go into the pool, but he knew he wasn't waterproof, but he didn't care. He went in the pool. His whole body got disabled. He was a dumb robot. And his body couldn't work. But someone ended up dragging him out, and he was in a weird pose. They dragged him out that corner, and then he started floating up in the air. He started floating up in the air. He fell down again. This time in the pool, his whole body got disabled again. But his body regenerated. He didn't know how. And then he saw a swing set. He wanted to go on it. And then he ended up doing multiple underdogs until getting launched off the swing into a Ferris wheel. And then he went on a rocket ship. And then he got launched in the air, and then he slid off. He slid off into a blender. He ended up going into a blender, but then got spit out by the blender because he wasn't tasty. Making a video. And then he went to the cafe. He saw a giant mug and then tried to put himself in there, but he failed. And then he could turn and yeah. And then he ended up turning into multiple ropes. And then he went into the cafe. He got RPG'd by the guy working there, so then he went out. He turned back to 7X. He got a rocket launcher. He shot it in there. He turned back small, but he turned to giant again. And then there was this withered foxy that pushed him in the lake, aka river. The foxy pushed him in the river, and then he got launched out somehow. And then God put him in the pool again, and his whole body stopped working. He started twerking in the water, and then he started to float up, but the foxy was making him not be able to climb up, and then he saw the staircase of to heaven because he died. He went up it. He jumped down to bring him back to life, but then he ended up getting roped by God, so he wasn't able to go down. And then God let him free, and then he he got teleported back to the staircase of heaven. He had no choice but to go up it. He had to go through a hole, but he didn't. He didn't wanna. So then he RPG'd the person that was working there. And then RPG'd a person. And then he went down to start his life back over again. God made him go back up. A rope made him hang upside down. He couldn't get off it. He wanted off. He couldn't. But then he remembered his Nike shoes were magical, and then his shoes made him get unloose, and then he got on a carousel and then started spinning, but he got off. And then he saw a blender, and he was gonna make a robot smoothie. And then he went in the blender and got span really, really well, really roughly. And then something made him go up, and it made him get roped. And nothing could help him at this point because the red thing couldn't help him. Okay, well, don't use the red thing. The red thing couldn't help him. His shoes couldn't help him. And God couldn't help him. He was just there hanging the rest of his life. But then a lucky, magical thing occurred. He ended up floating up and then started spinning in circles very violently. He was like a voodoo doll getting spun around. Okay, we'll use the red thing. And then the red thing saved him again. And then he tried to get on a hot air balloon, but he kept on phasing through it. He tried to get on a playground, but he ended up collapsing it because of how fat he was. He was sad, so he ended up getting on a carousel again. It stopped. He got sad. His leg stopped working, and it was dangling all over the place. His leg was spinning everywhere. His leg wasn't matching. And then he tried to find the withered foxy to try to fix the withered fox. And he tried to find the withered foxy so the foxy could fix his leg. He ended up finding him in a washer, and then he asked Foxy, "Can you please Can you please fix my leg?" Foxy agreed, and then he fixed his leg, but he fell over, and his leg was fixed. And then he was on a trampoline, and he went into a building, but then he fell off. And then He went on the swing again, trying to have a good time. And then he ended up doing an underdog. And then he landed at the statue of the frog. And then he didn't like it, so then he RPG'd it. The cops were after him, so he started running, but then they rammed him into the water and his body stopped working. And then Withered Foxy dragged him out and then fixed him, and then he started running again. But the cops made him fall in a pool. And then he went up to the place and his hand was stuck and nothing could help him now. So he was trying to spin himself in circles. So he asked Withered Foxy, "Can you please take me off this rope?" Foxy agreed. And then he took you off, and then you ragdolled into the statue of Frog. And then you fell on a jumping thing, and then you fell into a pool. Surely. And then he got sent to heaven. He got sent to heaven, but then he instead went to hell. And then he got roped. He was stuck like this for like his whole life. But then he realized I have free will, so I can quit my job and I'll get out of this mess. He quit his job. And then he was let go. And then he went to the radio tower and then RPG'd it. He fell to the ground like Michael Jackson when he did the moonwalk. And then he did the lean, but he failed. He got sad and then he ran away from the whole country. And then he tripped on a wall. And then he started floating up to the ropes again. This time, he was stuck like that again. But he could fix it. He fixed it, he fell, and then he fell into a river. He was taken to the cafe. He got dunked in liquid that would make him waterproof. He went into the public pool. And then he was waterproof, so now he could invade it. Now he could really invade it. And then he started doing stuff, but then a landmine exploded him up in the air, and then he did the Ronaldo sliding on the ground. And then he slammed into a building, and then a hammer smashed onto him. And then he got on a carousel, and then got thrown off. He got the RPG, and then exploded the statue. And then he killed 5 people at once. And And then he went up to hell. He went up to hell again. He got roped up. He was like, help! But then he was able to fix himself. He brought a knife with him, and then he cut the ropes. He fell to the ground, and his face smashed into the public pool thing. His leg was sticking up. He jumped, and then he went into a landmine field, and then he got launched in the air and face planted on a tree and fell to the ground. And then his rocket launcher failed, and he ended up rocket launching himself. And then he went to the staircase to heaven. He went up it, and this time he could not. And then he didn't get roped up. He thought he wasn't gonna get roped up, but he was wrong. And then he got roped up and stayed like this the rest of his life. The end.